A damn fine cup of coffee.
Welcome on in to your Sunrise Book Club. This morning, we continue our journey through American Cosmic, UFOs, religion, and technology. We are on our final chapter of this wonderful book, and it's always a bittersweet end when you get to the end of a book and you've taken its knowledge or its story. It's become a part of you, but now the book's over. So you're not going to be spending time with that author anymore. It's kind of like parting with a friend, right? That's where we're at. Final chapter. It is entitled Real and Imaginary. Tyler D's Spiritual Conversion in Rome. Now, for those of you not familiar, Tyler D is the scientist we've been hanging out with throughout this book, especially in the beginning. He is the scientist who invited DW to the Roswell crash site from 1947. Not the Roswell crash site, a different one. And when I say crash site, I'm talking UFO crash, of course. He brought DW, the author, and another scientist there, and he's like, look, this is where a UFO crashed in 1947. There's still pieces scattered about. One of the things the government does to cover up alien crash sites is scatter junk everywhere. Tin cans as far as the eye can see. They end up finding some anomalous material. James, the scientist that's with DW, analyzes it and it's like, hey, this is either a $1 billion prank to create some new material, or this is actually some off-planet shit we got right here. The rest of the book kind of goes through talking to James and Tyler and how they were both scientists at the top of their game. James working at a research university, professor, and Tyler being one of the top NASA scientists who puts experiments on board shuttles to, better humanity, and also has over 40 biomedical patents that help us every day in hospitals and help people heal and all that good stuff. So these are really smart guys. They have contact with off-world intelligence. They both do. They both have their own methods of contacting them, and they get information from them. For Tyler, he remembers his experiments. They're kind of sent to him, and he remembers them, and he knows they're going to work. For James, it's been more of a classic encounter throughout his life of running into UFOs, lights in the sky, and then even encountering little entities in his bedroom and having what's kind of an abduction experience. So two different scientists with two different levels of experiences coming to DW and being like, no, it's all real. And so James has been searching for something to prove that it's real. He finds this anomalous material at the crash site. That's it right there. So that's kind of been the journey of the book. We also talked a lot about belief and how religions start, because DW was a professor of religions, and how the UFO phenomenon can be seen as like the next iteration of a spiritual movement. What I also loved about the journey is Tyler D's mentor in NASA told him, look, we've covered most of the material world. The next big discovery is going to come from the spiritual world. Not that of course, there's many more discoveries to come in the physical world. That's not the point. Just kind of saying, like, the next big thing is going to come from the spiritual world. And that's why Tyler reached out to DW and this journey began. So now let's end the journey. We are back with Tyler on a trip to Rome, home of the Catholic Church, a place that rumbles up and inspires many opinions from many people. Let's just begin and see what Tyler's journey was like. And again, every chapter begins with a bit of a quote. This one is from David Grohl of the Foo Fighters. The sky is a neighborhood. This book began with a journey, and it ends with a journey. A plane trip to Rome when I visited the Vatican Secret Archives and the Vatican Observatory in Castel Gandolfo, one of the oldest established observatories in the Western world. For centuries, monks, nuns, and priests peered through the telescopes at the starry skies, here nestled next to a volcano and overlooking a startlingly blue volcanic lake. I was a guest at the observatory, and astonishingly, I was given the keys to their archive, which housed, among many other things, the works of Johannes Kepler and Nicolaus Copernicus, revolutionary thinkers who bravely forged the early paths of our current cosmologies. Like Tyler and James, Copernicus was a radical thinker, a person who observed the inexplicable and tried to make sense of it. At one time, the works of Copernicus were banned by the church. Ironically, his books are now prominently displayed in the archive. At the observatory, I felt as if I was in the quiet presence of the hub of unorthodox science, a place where, finally, religion and science did not compete. I was there with Tyler D. Almost 2 years had passed since Tyler had taken me and James blindfolded to ground zero of the UFO myth in New Mexico, Roswell. Now, the culmination of our work together. I took Tyler to Rome, to ground zero of the Catholic faith. Here he experienced a profound religious conversion right before my eyes. This was perhaps the most miraculous and strange event of my eventful 6 years of research. I have made the case that belief in extraterrestrials and UFOs constitutes a new form of religion. Media and popular culture have successfully delivered a UFO mythos to audiences through television series, music and music videos, video games, cartoons, hoaxes, websites, and immersive and mixed reality environments. Yeah, that was so wild when we learned in the last chapter about the UFO experience Disney ride. Like that sounded terrifying. And I bet it deeply affected the subconscious of every kid that went on it. And then they're like that they just associate every UFO encounter with that, you know? Cat agrees. New research in digital human interfaces reveals that it doesn't matter what a person might consciously believe, as data delivered through screens shoots it straight into memory. Data delivered through screens shoots it straight into memory. So you are what you eat and you are what you watch. The two important idioms in life, right? This chapter will explore a more complicated interpretation of the social effects of contact, where the perceived contact with a non-human intelligent divine being is simultaneously imagined and real. I'm not making an ontological claim that extraterrestrials are real in the sense that couches are real, although they could be. I'm arguing that perceived contact has very real effects with powerful social implications. While in Rome, I became reacquainted with a historical figure whom I came to view as a meta-experiencer. Sister Maria Agreda was a cloistered Spanish nun who lived in the 17th century. She was a mystic who wrote books about the Virgin Mary. Oh, we need one of those for the collection. Her earliest works, later burned by nuns of her convent, were cosmographies. They contained descriptions of her astral journeys, through space and over the earth, which she recorded as topographies of other countries, cultures, and space. As a young nun, she claimed to bilocate to colonial New Mexico, where she said she met indigenous Americans, taught them about the Catholic faith, and prepared them to be baptized by the Franciscan missionaries. The Catholic Church recognizes bilocation as a rare charism, a sacred skill. A person who bilocates is said to appear to be in two places simultaneously. Maria's story became very popular in the 17th century and even is mentioned in textbooks as part of the history of the Western United States, where I first encountered it as a student in high school. As I progressed in my research at the Vatican and then in the observatory archive, I was struck by Maria's similarity to Tyler. And bilocation, it sounds wild, but it is something that physicists and stuff consider and think about, because with spooky movement, or like when how two, act like whatever the fuck it is, you disturb one, the other one's thousands of miles away and it moves simultaneously. That whole thing. If it's as above, so below. So if it's at the tiniest level, we should be able to do it at the biggest level, right? I don't know. The reason for the trip. I was in Rome to do two things, apparently unrelated. I had agreed to go to the Vatican to help with research on the canonization accounts of a saint and a potential saint. While I was there, I would take the opportunity to assess the historical records of the search for extraterrestrial life, which I assumed I would find in the observatory's archive. The organization that funded my research trip to Rome had asked me to analyze the canonization trial records of St. Joseph of Cupertino and Sister Maria of Agreda. Why was St. Joseph canonized? They wondered, and not Sister Maria. Quantum entanglement? Yeah, that's what it is, Rogans. Thank you, dude. Yeah, do we really have to wonder why the dude was canonized and not Sister Maria back in the day? I mean, really? I think we all know. Their stories were somewhat similar, and they lived in the same era. Joseph was a 17th century Italian priest who was said to have levitated so frequently that the priests responsible for the case of his canonization stopped counting the number of people who presented themselves as witnesses. All right? Dude could levitate for real. Interesting though, okay? One of the reasons I really enjoy this author is she's got fucking chops, dude. If she's here at the Vatican, they called her to do research on the canonization of a saint. They don't just call fucking anybody to do that. Also, I didn't know this, but in the Conjuring movies, she's the consultant for all the religious stuff. She was the lore master for all that, which is really cool. So just saying, DW hangs out with all these cool scientists and talks them up, but she is dope as fuck as well. There are copious records of the testimonies of his flights, levitations, and even soaring to the ceiling of a cathedral. On at least one occasion, taking another person with him. Freaking fun. The large numbers suggest that they were probably not making these stories up. They may have been, but seemingly something had happened. Sister Maria Agreda, however, was never canonized, although her cause has been proposed to the church's congregation for the causes of saints many times. Her biographers have said that while her body levitated surrounded by a blinding white light in her small cell in the convent, she experienced herself soaring on the wings of angels across the ocean and in space to what Spain called the quote-unquote New World. Wahoo! I never had occasion to think of levitation as a reality, but Tyler had, although not with respect to the Catholic saints. Within the UFO literature, levitation was a common theme. Yeah, people in all abduction cases, they'd be floated out of their shit. People reported that during a UFO contact event, they had been levitated out of their beds into crafts, through windows, and so forth. Tyler proposed to come with me to Rome. The plan, he suggested, was that I would translate the documents and he would offer his analysis based on his work on aeronautics. Strangely, there was a precedent for such a collaboration. A number of individuals from aeronautic agencies had contacted me about my historical work on levitating saints. A colleague whose work focuses on Joseph of Cupertino had also been contacted by someone with similar space-related affiliations. Apparently, at least some members of the space industry believed in the possibility of levitation. Tyler and Maria were in a sense inadvertent colonists in their respective eras, who made imagined first contact. Maria allegedly bilocated to New Mexico, and the stories of her experiences helped Spanish missionaries obtain funding to convert indigenous Americans. Tyler was at the forefront of the human efforts to colonize space, just as Maria's voyage through space and to New Mexico preceded and accompanied the Spanish missionaries. Tyler's mental landscapes, which included the creation of alien-based technologies, were supported by a massive media infrastructure of UFO content, a fertile context for efforts to colonize and populate space. Maria's case is similar to Tyler's in that she seeded the cultural imagination with supernatural support for the missionaries' work. Tyler's spiritual experience. Notes from the field. It is one thing to describe how people utilize a UFO biblical or religious UFO framework for understanding how their religious traditions are linked to the new UFO mythos. It is another thing entirely to see it taking place. Being witnesses to the transformation of an individual's religious belief and practice is a powerful experience. I have witnessed this transformation more than once. Christopher Baldos, a Baptist from North Carolina, had been a pilot and owned a successful construction business. He had a profound UFO sighting that he interpreted as an extension of his own religious tradition. His congregation rejected this interpretation and called the experience demonic. For Baldos, this was an agonizing process that alienated him from his community and changed his life. Baldos struggled for several years, although he now accepts and seems at peace with his conversion. Tyler's experience was an accelerated version of that happened dramatically during his visit to the Vatican and the observatory at Castle Gandolfo. I mean, God, it'd be so fun to hang out in the Vatican observatory and read through their archives. They probably seen some weird shit in those skies. I began to suspect that this would not be an ordinary experience, as I observed how Tyler was admitted to the Vatican's secret archives. Gaining entrance to the archives is not easy, and I had started the process a year before my trip. The archives extend... Oh, it'd be so fun to go to the archives and research. The archives extend underground, and there are approximately 53 miles of shelving. One cannot just request a manuscript, because the archivist must find out where the manuscript is housed and then retrieve it, which is often a lengthy process. I provided the archivist with as much information as I could prior to my visit. One needs particular credentials to enter the archives, which are called quote-unquote secret, from a Latin word that should be more accurately translated as private. I had the requisite credentials. I had a PhD, and I'm a tenured professor in religious studies, specializing in the Catholic Church. There was a question about whether Tyler would be admitted. He is a respected scientist with over 40 patents to his name, but he did not have a PhD. Again, like Itzhak Bentov. Future thinkers that have no PhD. The shit's beamed to them and they're just thinkers. Nor was he in any way associated with religious history. Tyler arrived in Rome a day before me. I was in transit when he began sending me a series of texts. He was at the archives, but he was not allowed to enter. He had hired a translator who was dickering with the security personnel. Dickering instead of bickering is so great. Is that a typo? But I love dickering. Dickering with the security personnel and explaining that I had given him permission and needed his help. The archivist knew I would be arriving shortly, but said that Tyler did not have the proper credentials and would not be admitted. There were 3 stations of security through which one had to pass before obtaining a badge of entry. He was being held to the first station. Tyler had credentials as an 3 security checkpoints just to get down there. Tyler had credentials as an adjunct instructor at several research universities and letters from deans of those universities. He had a letter from me vouching that he was an analyst necessary for the project. None of this seemed to matter, and I sensed Tyler's resignation. There was nothing I could do, as I was on a plane 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Tyler texted, "Should I tell them who I am?" I considered his question carefully. Oh, it's like, well, what's he going to say that's going to make them open the doors to him? I'm very interested. But coffee. Who are you, Tyler? How are you going to I'm like, how are you going to convince them to let you in? What are you about to say? He's about to roll the dice on a charisma check, baby. I don't want to say deception because he's telling the truth, but gotta love it when that car drives by. It's a squeaker. A good morning squeak for the neighborhood. A little 5:06 a.m. All right. Why would it mean anything to them? And if it did, that might make things worse for us. I cautioned him against doing it, as I thought it wouldn't help and would possibly flag us as suspicious. We were there to view centuries-old documents about levitating saints. As a scholar of religion, I wouldn't raise any red flags of suspicion whatsoever. But Tyler's work in aeronautics, yeah, they don't want it to be used on a weapon or something, certainly would. I said no, but eventually it was apparent that he would not be admitted at all. At that point, after almost 2 hours of Tyler's translator haggling with security, I thought it couldn't hurt, so I said, okay, go ahead. The next text I received was, I'm in. My archive badge is good for 6 months. 6 months is the longest time for which one could have a badge. Tyler became at that point visible, at least to those at the Vatican secret archives, and his visibility provided access. Apparently, Tyler was known to members of the Vatican. They study that shit. How'd they know? I guess because he's like a billionaire. He also participated in some UFC fights, I think. Or maybe it was just MMA fights, and maybe not, probably not UFC, just MMA. But things were still not easy. Tyler, now in the Vatican secret archives, was lost, and I was still in transit. Things were still not easy. Tyler, now in the Vatican secret archives, was lost, and I was still in transit. He didn't know what he was looking for. I had given him directions, but he doesn't speak Italian, and he was nervous and lost. Then he heard an American accent and saw a tall, black-robed priest speaking in Italian with one of the archivists. He walked up to the priest and asked for help. The priest, Father McDonald, could see Tyler was lost and in need of help. He asked him to come outside to the courtyard. There, Tyler explained that what he needed to do. Impressed, Father McDonald vowed to help him. It turned out that Father McDonald was a special person, known by seemingly everyone at the Vatican, and had access to its every nook and cranny. By this time, I arrived in Rome. Father McDonald and Tyler were fast friends. So cool. Father McDonald had given Tyler a rosary rings and Catholic prayer cards and asked him to pray. Tyler was a Baptist, so I had to explain to him what these objects were and what they meant. They were sacred objects for Catholics, beads and rings that helped them remember the reality of the sacred. Tyler told me later how in the courtyard of the Vatican, with the sun streaming down on them, Father McDonald had blessed our project. I was dumbfounded. Why? I wondered, as I watched Tyler try on the ring. Because Tyler's dope! As it turned out, Tyler's unexpected access helped me too. Because of my association with him, I was able to look at documents and speak to key postulators, functionaries who present a case for an individual's canonization, or beatification. I think that's both sanctification. Words when someone goes through the process of becoming a saint. This would not have happened had I been there alone. This point was further driven home by my interactions with a cadre of young archivists who manned the desks. Intimidating in their black robes, they spoke to Tyler instead of me, referring to me as that lady doctor. Father McDonald was not like the Vatican archivist. He was funny and easygoing and spoke with me directly. Good job, Father McDonald, and fuck you, Vatican archivist. He was fascinated by our research and curious too, as I didn't tell him exactly what I was studying. The study of the UFO phenomenon from any angle whatsoever is controversial, even if it is one just approaching it as a cultural history. I wasn't going to tell him that I was assessing accounts of levitation and bilocation with my space engineer colleague. At some point, he figured it out, but it didn't affect his relationship with us, and he invited us to attend a mass in St. Peter's Basilica. The Vatican has traditionally been protected by the Swiss guards, mercenaries who are trained by the Swiss armed forces in their colorful attire, outfitted with swords. They are placed in strategic positions around the Vatican. They don't appear to provide any type of security. Their presence seems to be more for the benefit of the constant lines for tourists who circle the Vatican and stop for photographs. The real guards who wore camouflage uniforms and carried very big guns, which looked like automatic weapons. The guns matched the gravity of their grim faces. They were everywhere. Against my counsel, Tyler asked one if he would like to have a cafe latte, to which the guard replied with a steely no. To enter the Vatican grounds, we needed to pass by these formidable armed men. Fortunately, Father McDonald, with his black robe and breezy demeanor, parted the guards like Moses parting the Red Sea, and as long as we were close behind him, we could go seemingly anywhere. The second day of my visit to Rome, I was in St. Peter's Basilica, hearing Mass with Father McDonald, Tyler, and 6 nuns. The Mass was celebrated in Latin near the incorruptible body of Pope John the 23rd, which certainly enhanced the surreal quality of my experience. Yeah, whoa. What a fucking trip, dude. We had passed by the grim-faced guards and into the sacristy, a chamber that seemed off limits to all non-Vatican insiders. Oh, so cool. The priests were robing for service. I carefully avoided direct eye contact with them. I could see that Tyler and I were conspicuous, judging by the many faces that turned in our direction. When Father McDonald was robed, we went back into the basilica, and the Mass began. I tried to help Tyler understand what was happening. I saw by the way he looked around at the frescoes and the cavernous ceiling and the sunlight shining through the stained glass that he was in another world. I pointed out that before us was the incorruptible body of a saint. He nodded in recognition. Later I found out that he didn't know what I had said and was astonished that he had been so close to a dead body. He had never heard of the tradition of incorruptible saints, according to which certain people's bodies do not decay after death and are pronounced incorruptible by the Church. Most often these persons are considered by Catholics to be saints. Their bodies are often placed in glass to be viewed by the faithful. Tyler and I talked about this on the day after his mother's funeral. 2 weeks after we had returned from Rome, the fact that we had been so close to John 23rd's preserved body was comforting to him. After Mass, Father McDonald invited us with him on rounds at the local hospital, where he was celebrating another Mass. At a small hospital chapel, and administering rites to the dying patients, as well as anointing the sick. The last rites provided the absolution for sins, preparing the dying person's soul for death. The anointing of the sick is one of the 7 sacraments of the Church, in which a priest blesses the person through the administration of blessed oil. I thought that Tyler's experience with helping terminally ill children would have prepared him for this. Before Mass, Father McDonald and I recited several traditional Catholic prayers. Tyler, not knowing the prayers, sat in silent contemplation, looking around at the very small chapel, which contained a relic, a fragment of a bone of St. Teresa of Avila. After Mass, we went around the hospital with Father McDonald. He respectfully announced his presence to the patients, and those who wanted his services welcomed him. I was to accompany him to the bedsides of women, and Tyler was to do so when it was a man who was dying. Father McDonald and I entered the room of a woman who seemed near death. Her daughter sat beside her and held her mother's hand. Father McDonald's eyes shone with mercy and love as he tenderly crossed the mother's forehead and with blessed oil, and he asked God to bless her. The woman's eyes sparkled and she smiled. I felt my throat constrict and choke back tears. As we left the room, Father McDonald and I looked at each other. He was clearly touched. He said, "Now you see, I get more from them than I give to them. And there was beauty. It was God." Tyler went with Father McDonald into a room of a young man in his late 20s or early 30s. I had seen this young man earlier at Mass. He had struggled slowly with a walker to attend the service. He seemed like a proud, strong young man who was humbled by the approach of death. I could see that Tyler felt immediate kinship with him. 15 minutes went by, and then Tyler and Father McDonald came out. Tyler could not look at me. His head was bowed. I did not try to speak with him because I understood. His heart was broken. The experience prepared Tyler for his conversion. As if following a script, events happened one after the other that instigated a profound shift in Tyler's understanding of his life and his future and of the reality of the beings. I was the witness to these events and to his transformation. The day after the hospital experience, we played tourist. I thought that perhaps some sightseeing would lighten the intensely religious mood that seemed to have gripped Tyler since his first day in Rome. I was wrong. We took it, it's like he's there and they're just like boom, boom, boom. They're like, "No, Tyler, we're gripping you now, babe." We took a tour of Rome on a golf cart, which turned, I think that's a whole nother thing, which turned out to be a bad idea. The streets of Rome are not smooth, and we jostled violently about as the tour guide steered our cart in and out of the throngs of speeding trucks and vans. That sounds fun. At one point, we were pulled over by the police. The guide and the police haggled for 20 minutes. We waited patiently and were finally brought to a beautiful church of Santa Sabina, which is the oldest remaining Roman basilica, which is the oldest remaining Roman basilica and sits atop the Aventine Hill. The church is named for a noble Roman woman who was converted to Christianity by her servant Serifia. Both were executed by the Roman government and later declared saints. The church was built on what is said to have been the site of Sabina's home, which was near a temple of the goddess Juno. The place was steeped in Roman and Roman Catholic history. Tyler and I made our way around the church as the guide described the history of the location and its significance to the Italians. We happened to arrive just as a wedding party was making its preparations. A small group of classical musicians was playing as we toured the church. Tyler found his way to the small side chapel. Was he kneeling? I couldn't tell, as a crowd of worshippers obstructed my view. At that moment, the guide happened to meet a friend, a historian of that church, who had just finished giving a tour. The historian led me outside of the church and showed me its large wooden door. On the door was carved one of the earliest depictions of the crucifixion of Christ. He is pictured as if standing calmly with outstretched arms between the two thieves, whose arms are also outstretched. They looked expectant, not crushed or tortured. But this was not all that was on the door. I also saw images of levitation. I was struck by these images and asked the historian about what they depicted, and she seemed confused. I suppose, yes, these are of levitation, she said. The ascension of Christ is depicted in 2 panels, and then a third shows Christ ascended. Beneath him is a mysterious object that looks like a globe or a disc. Scholars are not sure what it represents. Later, as I researched the mystery of the object, I found several websites that associated it with a UFO. Another panel represents the prophet Elijah ascending into the heavens on a cloud. In yet another panel, the prophet of Habakkuk. I've never heard of him. That's cool. I gotta look him up. Habakkuk is either ascending to heaven or being lifted up by an angel. Overall, the door showed numerous examples of bodies ascending to the heavens. I was excited to share my discovery with Tyler, but when I searched for him in the church, he was nowhere to be found. I found our guide and asked her if she had seen him. She looked at me oddly and pointed toward the small chapel. There was Tyler on his knees praying. The wedding guests were starting to arrive. We needed to leave. I looked at Tyler and realized that he was not in a normal frame of mind. I touched him and whispered we needed to leave. The music was playing. The arriving guests were impeccably dressed, and several looked at us as if we were intruders. It was time to leave. Tyler was crying. Our guide, now very confused, explained that there was one more destination on our tour. We got back into the golf cart and left the church of Santa Sabina. Oh, Tyler's like, his whole thing is just breaking apart right now. In a good way. After the tour, we found a quiet restaurant and ate a light meal. Tyler was quiet. Is everything okay? I asked. No, nothing's okay. What's wrong? I asked. But I think I knew already. Diana, I have to go back and help people directly. I feel like I'm a complete failure. I was surprised. Tyler is far from a failure, but now he felt like one. Will you help me? He asked. Will you introduce me to priests or nuns who can help me serve like this? I want to help anyone who is hungry or in need or in help. I don't care if I ever work at my day job again. Hell yeah, Tyler. I will, I said. I knew that Tyler was having a spiritual conversion and that its effects in his life would be completely different from what he expected. I had a feeling that he would learn more about what the future held for him when we went to the observatory archive in Castel Gandolfo. And I was feeling very uneasy. To me, the Vatican looked like a medieval feudal palace. The constant presence of the elite guards put me on edge. I understood that I was lucky that Tyler had met Father McDonald and that we were then invited to attend several important meetings, but this was only because of Tyler's access. None of this would have happened if I had been there alone. As it turned out, our time at the Vatican Observatory couldn't have been more different from our experience at the Vatican. Brother Guy Consolmagno Consul Magno, director of the observatory, is a well-known astronomer who specializes in meteorites and asteroids. He is an American Jesuit with degrees from MIT and the University of Arizona. After we drove up to the observatory and parked, Brother Guy greeted us warmly. He gave us a brief tour of the premises, carefully showing us which doors we could enter and which were off limits. After the tour, Brother Guy presented me with the keys to their archive. I have spent half my life looking through archives, and this was unprecedented. Archivists are usually very protective of their holdings, and we were going to be looking at the works of Johannes Kepler and other great scientists of Western cosmology. When Tyler saw the list of books we would be viewing, his face lit up. He had spent his entire life exploring space, and now he would get to see the original works that have paved the way for his present vocation. The archive itself is beautiful. On exhibit are old technologies of space exploration, the first telescopes developed to scour the galaxy. Brother Guy had lined the walls with old photographs of nuns who had worked at the observatory and helped chart the star patterns. He was correcting the historical record by including those who had been left out. I felt like I was home, and Tyler did too. Every morning around 10 a.m., the brothers and priests would gather for a cappuccino and a cafe latte in a room near the archive. Oh, that sounds like probably talking about such cool stuff. As anyone who has been to Italy came to attest, Italian coffee may be the best in the world. Tyler, who used to avoid coffee as part of his healthy living protocol, had cast aside restraint and was now addicted. We stood in a small room with about 10 Jesuits and various types of PhDs, all connected to space in some way. Astrophysics, astronomy, and related disciplines. "What are you looking for in our archive?" one of the brothers asked. I wasn't going to say that I was writing a book about the topic of UFOs. That could have immediately alienated us from these amazing scholars. I told them the truth without using the word UFO. We're looking for instances of aerial phenomena. Aerial phenomena? Several of the others stood and stared at us. Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna say aerial phenomena, they're gonna know you're talking about fucking UFOs. Yes. I waited a few seconds and then I laughed. To my relief, they laughed too. That was the end of the conversation. To set the record straight, the Jesuits at the Vatican Observatory are not actively searching for UFOs, nor are they engaged in anything related to ufology. Brother Guy has a wonderful sense of humor, and some of his jokes and comments taken out of context have fed into the conspiracy theories about the Catholic Church, which these scientists are doing. What these scientists are doing is revealing that science is compatible with religion. And they are doing it so effectively that after hearing Brother Guy speak about his vocation, my Baptist scientist colleague chose to become a Catholic. Interesting. Tyler's transformation and his revised understanding. On our first morning in the archive, Brother Guy stuck his head in the door and peeked in at us. We were busy identifying books we wanted to read that day. Brother Guy told us that he was heading up to the actual observatory where the telescopes are housed and asked if we wanted to come into a talk he was giving to a group of young scientists from the European Space Agency. Of course we did. I heard Brother Guy speak several times, and I knew that his insights, which were always delivered with humor, could be profound and transformative. I had a feeling that this talk would influence Tyler, who was on fire to change his life. We jumped up from our desks to help Brother Guy get organized for the talk. Soon we are in the car driving through the gardens of the estate and up to the top of the small mountain, which overlooked a crystal blue volcanic lake. The first thing I noticed, besides the breathtaking scenery, was a fleet of sleek cars lined up in a row, gleaming in the morning sun. It was an impressive sight. The young scientists were eager to see the historical hub of their own space program and meet the Jesuit who directed this enchanting observatory. They were welcoming to Tyler and me when Brother Guy introduced us. I was introduced as a professor from the University of North Carolina. When Tyler was introduced along with his affiliations, the youthful crowd burst into cheers and applause. I was proud that at least among these smart young Europeans, Tyler, whom I considered an American hero, was not invisible. Yes, Tyler D., the great invisible American hero. That's what we've been learning about mostly. There are people working for the good out there in the deep dark of the machine. Tyler's one of them. As I predicted, Brother Guy's talk was funny, informative, and profound. He made the young scientists laugh and cry. He addressed the conspiracy theories about what he and other scientists do at the observatory by showing images from popular culture, such as scenes from popular movies and books that paint Castle Gandolfo as a hub of the mystery and He addressed the conspiracy theories about what he and the other scientists do at the observatory by showing images from popular culture, such as scenes from popular movies and books that paint Castle Gandolfo as a hub of mystery and intrigue. And then the reality, which turned out to be pictures of the priests and brothers sitting together discussing the composition of meteorites. The pictures conveyed the mundane daily lives of the observatory scientists, even if they did have Italian lattes. The popular depictions of Castle Gandolfo were so far removed from the reality that the whole group erupted in laughter. Brother Guy talked about how after he received his PhD, he felt a call to help people in need and had joined the Peace Corps. Stationed in a very poor country, he helped to feed the people of the small town where he was posted and helped them obtain clean water. At night, the villagers would gather together and implore him to take out his telescope so they could look up at the night sky. They asked him about the meaning of what they saw. It was then, he said, that something within him clicked. He realized that he had a vocation and that he was to help people realize that there was more to life than just what to eat for lunch. The wonder of the cosmos and the questions that arise from it were part of the human condition. It was as important as the bread we eat. As it fed the soul. It was literally spiritual food. He realized that he was in a unique position to help foster this wonder. Brother Guy's words sent an electric charge through the audience. When he finished, everyone rose and filed into the observatory for a demonstration of the telescope. Tyler was introspective. I could tell that Brother Guy's talk had affected him the way I thought it would. Not only did Tyler have a desire to help people in a meaningful way like Brother Guy, but he also had similar training and also worked in the space-related research. He was touched by the wonder of the cosmos, and his life was a testament to the type of vocation not recognized by secular institutions. Here at Castle Gandolfo, he saw that there were scientists who lived a life of vocation or calling. They wedded their spiritual lives to their work lives. They didn't compartmentalize religion into attendance at a religious service one day a week. Their faith, spirituality, and religion permeated everything they did, and they were scientists. That night, Tyler and I were in the archive looking at the first of the books of Kepler. I had noticed that the observatory's neighbor was a convent and home for cloistered nuns, and my own room was adjacent to theirs. As I sat in the archive of the Vatican Observatory in Castle Gandolfo, staring at Johannes Kepler's analysis of Copernicus, cosmology, I was struck by the thought that Sister Maria of Agreda, whose records I have seen, had claimed to have I was struck by the thought that Sister Maria of Agreda, whose records I had seen, had claimed to have bilocated to New Mexico, the part of the world where Tyler had taken James and me to visit the supposed UFO crash site, and I looked up quickly. Tyler looked at me, surprised by the suddenness of my move. I was blindfolded on the trip to New Mexico, I said, so I don't know exactly where I was, but we just read about Sister Maria, and she describes where she went. Is this the same place where she imagined she went? Tyler's face appeared to freeze, and he looked back down at his book. He wasn't going to answer me. The small archive suddenly felt large to me, not in any spatial way, but in a way that fused it with my memories of New Mexico. Ooh, and now we're going to get into Sister Maria's episodes of Bilocation. The horror of being two places at once. No thanks, man. I just want to be one place at once, one place at a time. In the early 1600s, as Spain was exploring and colonizing Western North America, the youthful Maria claimed that she would, with the help of angels, she flew through space and over the ocean to New Mexico. Her sister nuns said they witnessed Maria during her alleged bilocations, and that she rose a few feet off of the floor and was surrounded by a brilliant light. The veracity of Maria's account and her experiences was bolstered by the reported encounters between Franciscan missionaries in New Mexico and members of the native tribe of the Jumanos, who presented themselves as eager to be baptized. Allegedly, the Jumanos said that they had been visited by a lady in blue who spoke to them about the Catholic faith. This story traveled back to Spain with Alonso de Benavides, the first commissioner of the Inquisition. Oh, boo, in New Mexico. Oh, the Inquisition. Ah! He met with Maria and questioned her closely about what she saw and with whom she spoke. Benavides was impressed by her account, which included details of things of which he thought she could not have been aware. And he made a report to the King of Spain, Philip IV. Maria's journeys were strategically politicized by Benavides. He and others used them to justify their continued funding and efforts to expand the Spanish Empire. Yeah, boo! Horrors of the Spanish Inquisition and missionaries, man. Not good. The missionaries wanted to believe, and most likely did believe, that Sister Maria actually appeared in physical form to the people who lived there. Benavides and others used this miraculous story as proof that God wanted the area under Spanish rule. And that's no. As I revisited this historiography, I thought about what was erased in its telling. Sitting in the archive, it was hard not to remember Sister Maria's early work on the cosmography and her recognition that some of the heretical scientific discoveries of her own era. Sorry, I read that wrong. Sister Maria's early work on cosmography and her recognition of some of the heretical scientific discoveries of her own era. Those works, her first, were burned, and only a few copies remain. Oh, good. Thank goodness. She wrote that she saw the Earth from space and it was a spinning sphere. She is best known as the author of The Mystical City of God, a biography of the Virgin Mary. And her early work on the science and cosmography is largely ignored. Did we know it was a sphere spinning at that point? I got to look that up. I could not help but draw a correlation with Tyler and his own imaginings of how humans will eventually explore and live in space. Was Tyler a contemporary Maria, existing in a sort of cloister of invisibility? He's like cloistered inside NASA. Maria imagined herself traveling to what was for her a new world and making contact with its inhabitants. And this imaginary or real voyage paved the way for real missionaries. Tyler's visions are supported by television and media that we accept on a quote-unquote imaginary level. Tyler's version of space travel, Tyler's version of space travel. Not versions, it's vision. Sorry, I gotta go back. Tyler's visions are supported by television and media, and we accept on an imaginary level Tyler's version of space travel. Maria's visions were spread through rumors, stories, and circulated letters. Today, visions of UFOs and space travel are fueled by a vast media industry. Just as in Tyler's case, there were inexplicable, realist aspects to Maria's imaginings. Had Maria been alive today, perhaps she would have been a remote viewer with the Stanford Research Institute. Whoop whoop, SRI, yay! We love SRI. As she seems to have possessed the qualifications and skills. There is a history of psychic cosmonauts with religious traditions, people who claim to fly through space with the help of angels or beings of light. And that starts as early as Enoch, and then even both scientists, the American scientist Parsons, and I'm forgetting the Russian scientist, they both had contact with angelic and demonic beings when they are developing space travel. And they're the reasons we escape the bounds of gravity. Even if Maria, in some sense, creatively imagined a place to which she had never been, but had perhaps read about, it would not discredit the very real history of how her reported travels helped legitimize continued Spanish expansion. As Jeff Cripple suggests, instead of positing an either-or scenario that negates the inexplicable, and anomalous and reduces Maria's claims to purely imaginings and nothing more, why not consider the story within the framework of both and? This would allow both the possibility that Maria really had some experiences that cannot be easily explained away or reduced to political machinations, and that these experiences helped pave the way for Spanish colonization in a world that was new to them, a place where people had already existed for thousands of years. Maria articulated her own version of the events and their inexplicable nature. She even criticized Benavides for being too quote-unquote literal in his interpretation of the bilocations. At the same time, she insisted that they really did happen. She writes, God showed me those things by means of abstract images of the kingdoms and what was going on there, or perhaps they were shown to me there. Neither then nor now was or am I capable of knowing the way it happened. Whether or not I really and truly went in my body is something about which I cannot be certain, and it is not surprising that I have questions in my mind. For St. Paul understood things better than I, yet tells us that he was carried up into the third heaven, but does not know whether it was in the body or out of it. What can I assure you beyond my doubt that the case did in fact happen? And that as far as I know, I had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with the devil or wrong desires. AKA, she didn't know if she was dreaming this or it actually happened. It feels real to her. She just knows that it felt very positive and it did happen to her. Significantly, Maria notes that her travels would not have happened without the assistance of angels or angelic beings. Angelic beings show up again and again in the discourse of psychic cosmonauts. Of course, Tyler believes in beings that help him develop technologies. Empirical or not, Maria's imaginings helped Spain colonize part of America. As a woman living in the 17th century who dared to write, she inspired suspicion and had to answer to the Inquisition. Yeah, she could have been burnt alive. Like when the Inquisition comes to talk to you, it's not good. They're looking to murder you and torture you because that's what they like to do. She later claimed that she was pressured to answer Benavides in a way that he desired. Just like everyone who gets inquired by the Inquisition. Some of her writings were burned. Later, she recanted her recantations and rewrote many of her former works from memory. Amen. Colonial expansion was forged through the energy money. Colonial expansion was forged through the energy, money, and desires of the Spanish elite. Maria's voyages and first contact were put in service to this end. Across the table in the silent archive, Tyler was diligently searching through the pages of an 18th century book about electromagnetism. I considered that his own special skills were used to serve an industry that sought colonization in the expansion of space. It was also an endeavor undertaken by the elite. Yeah, wow. He is Maria. The heads of the private space industries are billionaires, and ufology and the study of anomalous aerial phenomena, as observed by my colleague Brenda Dinsler, are overwhelmingly white and male, and over 90% Anglo-American. To make it even more difficult to attain any kind of real knowledge about the topic, Tyler's work is invisible, as is most of James's. The historians of ufology, with few exceptions, ignore the history of African American and indigenous traditions of the UFO, boo, which predate the standard assumption that the UFO mythos was born in the year 1947. The founders of the Nation of Islam were articulating a UFO narrative by the 1930s, and according to Elijah Muhammad, the religion's early leader, Wallace Fard Muhammad, had spoken of UFOs in the 1920s. That night, yeah, like we always talk about, like, this is just, it's not just a Western phenomenon. It's been going on for eons. Us in the West are just the things like the crash in 1947, the sighting over D.C. back in the day after Jack Parsons died. That's all the things that are here to shake us back into a more open spiritual mind. But to other cultures, this shit just goes on. Entities are just here. Yeah, you can talk to them. No big whoop. No big whoop. Get over it. Enjoy your life. That night, Tyler admitted that his understanding of the beings was being transformed by his experiences. His encounter with Sister Maria and her alleged bilocations The idea that they may have happened within a hub of modern UFO activity and information about the levitations of other saints and even the apparitions of the Virgin Mary has significantly affected his new understanding. This information, coupled with what he had felt while making hospital rounds with Father McDonnell, and then the insights he gathered from the other scientists at the Vatican and the Vatican Observatory, shifted his interpretive structure with respect to what he thought might be extraterrestrials. He felt more in touch with them than ever, and somehow his connection had been supercharged by the environment in Rome and in Castel Gandolfo. But he also felt that he knew less about what they were, who they were, and their intentions. Later that night, we were sitting alone in the archive. Tyler was quietly looking through a manuscript. He received a text message and told me, as he slumped in his chair, that his mother had just been admitted to hospice. Every night, the brothers and priests at the observatory celebrate a mass in a small chapel. We were always invited to attend. I now suggested that Tyler go, and he readily agreed. When we arrived at the chapel, I asked the priest if he would offer mass for Tyler's mother. Tyler was touched. He asked the priest to bless some of the rosaries that he had bought in the Vatican. During the last conversation he had with his mother after he returned home, he gave her a blessed rosary. She took it and put it around her neck and then held Tyler's hand. Later, before her funeral, he asked his Baptist siblings if they would allow their mother to be buried with the rosary. Seeing how moved she was to have received the gift, and knowing that the brothers and the priests at the Vatican had prayed for her, they readily agreed. Later, Tyler learned that while the Mass was being celebrated in the observatory chapel, his mother, who had been uncommunicated for months, roused to consciousness for several hours, with perfect memory, and conversed with her family. This was reported to Tyler by his sister. She did not know that Tyler and the observatory community had been praying fervently for their mother during that time. That reminds me of the story of the dog Nina from our last couple chapters ago. The ending, and the beginning. Tyler's life had been unusual by any standard, but it had not been overly religious or overtly religious. He believed that he was in contact with beings of some sort, and that this contact was spiritual. However, he never theorized about what the beings were, other than that they were related to spirituality and space. This trip motivated him to begin thinking about who the beings might be. He now felt a kinship to Sister Maria of Agreda, and he vowed to devote his life to a new ministry. He believed that these beings were similar to the beings spoken of by Sister Maria, the angels that had transported her to what is now the southwestern United States. Like Ray Hernandez, a confirmed atheist whose experiences transformed him into an agnostic, Tyler's understanding of his relationship to the beings shifted completely. Months after we returned to the United States, Tyler was invited to return to Rome. He would make his first communion as a Catholic at a small mass with Pope Francis at none other than the Church of Santa Sabina, where he had first felt, in his words, the presence of the Holy Spirit. The Mass took place on St. Valentine's Day, in which a rare occurrence was also Ash Wednesday this year. I never anticipated that this story would end like this, with Tyler's conversion to Catholicism. For Tyler, it was not an end, but a very beginning. And that is the final chapter. Next Wednesday, we will read conclusions, DW's thoughts on the whole thing. So there we go. The story of DW's conversion from a skeptic on UFOs and the like to a believer is this book. But it's also at the same time the conversion of a scientist who's talking to off-world intelligences, converting to a more religious spirituality, trying to figure out what it is. And of course, this reminds me of in the beginning of the book, and in the book Encounters, she describes being in Jacques Vallée's, this guy, my favorite, OG UFO researcher, get to know him, American hero of the weird. But anywho, she's in his private library at his house, and she notices that most of his books, this guy's an astrophysicist, studied the cosmos for years. Most of the books are not about, straight space and science. They're all about demons and angels. Most of his most profound, the books that are most prominent. And he even suggests to her, oh, you know what book you need to read? This book about Satan, called Satan, about the history of Satan, written by some Canaanite Canaanite nuns back in the early 19th century. It's a book I've been trying to find forever now, but I can't. But I just want to read it so bad. But that's the theme that we've been reading here. We've done a lot of good research in the physical. Now it's time to marry the physical and the spiritual, right? Come together, science and religion. That's where the next, I feel like that's got to be, at least from what we've read, the next evolution, right? That's got to be what needs to happen. But that is the Sunrise Book Club, American Cosmic, second to last chapter. We got the conclusion coming at you next Wednesday. Join me for that. For now, it's time to get into it. Bye-bye.